Hello and welcome back to the channel. Crete is the largest island in Greece and has a long and fascinating history. You can read more about it in my WordPress blog. The address is in the description box below. Today we'll take a bus ride, visit a monastery, learn a bit about the local history, and take a much-needed break in Rethymno. We'll start out with the bus ride today on The Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy, and I love travel, history, and finding out what makes people tick. If you're enjoying my content, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your help means more people will see my content. If you want more information, I have a WordPress blog, a page on Facebook, and a Twitter handle. The addresses are here or in the information block at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and enjoy your visit. As you can see from this map, Crete is a large island located to the south of the Greek mainland. It sits in a seismically active area with mountains, hills, and valleys, stretches about 162 miles from west to east, but is much narrower from north to south, and is home to about 625,000 people. That makes it about the size of the U.S. state of Alabama, but Alabama has over 5 million people. Almost half the island is uninhabited. 4 distinct mountain ranges can be found, of which the best is probably called the Lefka or White Mountains here on the island. Like most inhabited areas, the region was home to various waves of invading settlers, beginning in the Bronze Age and including the original inhabitants, probably hunter-gatherers, although no one seems to know where they came from, the Minoans, who had their own civilization, the Mycenaeans, who had their own civilization, the Romans, who overlaid their beliefs on top of the preceding civilizations, the Byzantines, the Venetians, and the Ottomans. Despite the rugged mountains, the earliest settlers adapted by creating terraced fields on the slopes, and farming remains important to this day. Settlements generally sat near fertile valleys or on plains and coastal areas, which made it easy for trade and communication. After a bumpy and somewhat quease-inducing ride, I arrived with my fellow travelers at the Arkadi monastery. There's no shortage of opinions about how and when this monastery got built, but we do know it pre-existed the Ottoman campaign to conquer the island. The monastery sits on a plateau, is well fortified, and is surrounded by a thick high wall. According to tradition, the foundation of the monastery is sometimes attributed to a Byzantine emperor named Heraclius, and sometimes to a different emperor named Arcadius. Each of them is shown in images here, sometime in the 5th century. My guess would be that this was some kind of a religious site, although what we see today is of a much later vintage. A different tradition tells us that in Crete it's common for monasteries to be named after the monk that founded the building, which lends support to the theory that Arkadi may have been founded by a monk named Arkadios. We do know the monastery was prosperous and the Catholic Church was completed sometime in the 1590s. In 1610 they added the stables and they added a refectory or dining hall for the monks in 1670. The monastery continued to thrive economically and culturally. The monastery became a great center of learning and for the copying of manuscripts, although the majority of those were lost during the destruction of the building by the Ottomans in 1866. This aerial photo from Google Earth gives you an idea of the shape and size of the site. As you can see, there's a square perimeter, probably built to be defensible. There are walkable walls with lookouts and loopholes for weapons to fire on encroaching troops all the way around. The monastery was cited to be economically feasible and built to be defensible, as well as attractive. This first photo shows you the fortified main entryway. In its day, it probably would have boasted 2 sets of huge doors and possibly a portcullis, one of those large iron affairs that slams down between the gateways, although I didn't see any sign of it when I looked. Behind the church is a pleasant garden and park. The entire facility is surrounded by that wall I mentioned. You can climb up and walk all the way around. The openings you see here were loopholes, perhaps initially designed to allow defenders to look out and to dump boiling water or pitch on anyone who dared to attack them, or later on to allow riflemen to aim and shoot at marauders in relative safety. The church you see here inside the monastery is dedicated to St. Constantine and his mother, St. Helen, and blends Byzantine, Venetian, and Renaissance architectural styles. It's referred to as a Catholicon, and in this case is the major church building in a monastery. It features a front facade complete with a bell tower, interior frescoes, an iconostasis, which is a wooden screen that separates the sanctuary from the nave and is used to display icons or painted representations of either sacred events or individuals, such as the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ. The interior of the church is actually quite plain, but it includes not just that iconostasis, but separate icons featuring Saints Constantine and Helena, richly adorned with silver coverings. The monastery is quite isolated and somewhat inland from the coast, but that doesn't mean it was free from danger. There are views in all four directions, only one visible approach, thick walls and loopholes, which would have been used for defense. The Arkadi monastery gained fame during the Cretan revolt of 1866 to 1869 against Ottoman rule. In 1866, hundreds of Cretan rebels, along with women and children, sought refuge here in the monastery and made it their headquarters. We know that the Ottomans besieged the monastery, and one way or another, that siege led to a very tragic event. The monastery apparently held out for about 24 hours until the commanding pasha's military artillery was sighted in front of the main entrance. Rather than surrender, the Cretan rebels set off the gunpowder stores, sacrificing themselves to avoid capture. One story says that over 1,000 Cretans died in the blast. The oldest part of Rethymno is one of the best preserved towns on the island from the Renaissance period, with a blend of both Turkish and Venetian architecture. The harbor here is quite pretty, but not large enough to handle a large ship. The lighthouse does make a nice landmark. Rethymno also boasts Crete's longest beach. This is a lovely beach-oriented community on the north shore of the island. The old town has some buildings dating from the period of Venetian control. Like most medieval cities, unless they've been bulldozed and rebuilt in favor of vehicular traffic, the old town is a maze of winding streets, mostly pedestrianized and often shaded with grapevines or rose vines trained onto trellises that cross over the streets. Raimondi Fountain is the centerpiece of the Platano Square, which is actually named after the plane trees that originally were found here. The fountain is no mere decoration. Until quite recently in human history, fountains were where people got their drinking water. In this case, the fountain supplied the town with fresh water from a nearby hill. Its ornate design makes it hard to miss. It's also very busy, since this is where any lost tourists are always told to wait for their guides. I know this because I saw it happen. The fountain was built in 1626, when Venice still controlled the island, by the city's rector, a man named Raimondi, who named the fountain after himself. It's quite the hodgepodge of styles, in my opinion. There are 3 lions' heads which spouted the water into 3 basins to collect it. There were Greek Corinthian columns with an inscription on top in Latin. According to the local legend, drinking from the fountain guarantees you eternal youth. I probably wouldn't have tried it, but I couldn't, since no water was flowing the day I visited. This solidly constructed public building is called the Loggia and dates from 1538, during the period of Venetian control of the island. It was a kind of town hall. About a century later, builders added on a second or upper story to expand the floor space. After the fall of Rethymno to the Ottoman Turks, the building was converted into a mosque and a minaret was added, but that was finally pulled down in the 1930s. Today it houses the Archaeological Museum of Rethymno. This former mosque has gone through several repurposings. It was originally built as a Catholic church dedicated to St. Mary. When the Turks captured the city, they repurposed the church and initially named it after a man named Gazi Hussein Pasha. I'll just call him the Pasha. Sometimes referred to as the Mad Pasha, the Blonde Pasha, or the Pasha of the Axe. The Pasha was a military officer who got his first notice when he managed to draw what was thought to be an unbendable bow, rather like Odysseus bending his bow when he returned home from Troy. Whether he actually did bend that bow, or whether that's just a story inspired by the Greek hero, or perhaps even his own PR, was never explained to me. The history is quite a bit more definite about the man and his career. He was a soldier who worked his way up through the ranks. He was brutally efficient. He was eventually promoted to serving as governor of Egypt, where he was despised apparently for his cruelty, greed, and violence, which is how he got his last nickname, the Pasha of the Axe. He was more than just cruel or violent. He was a thief, and the Egyptians really hated him. Apparently he stole everything that wasn't nailed down. After Greece shook off Ottoman rule, the mosque was renamed Nezaratsi, which means something like bitter oranges, and then eventually reconverted back into a church dedicated to St. Nicholas, although apparently it never opened up for that purpose. Today it's the location of the Municipal Music School. I'm something of a cat lover, so today's final view is going to be one of the many stray cats to be found all over Greece. If you were with me when we visited Olympia, I showed you a picture of just one of several dozen that I saw in the ruins. I found out that most cats here in Greece are strays. They aren't feral, but they don't live in human homes. They come into so much contact with humans that they're actually quite tame, even friendly. These cats are a trademark of the country. This particular one came up and started scent marking my ankles by rubbing against me just after I took this photo. It was probably looking for a handout. Unfortunately, I didn't have any kitty kibble to share. And with that, it's time for us to move on. Come back next time for another adventure with me here on The Armchair Traveler.